Good morning, everybody. It's the following day, so it's January 25th, right? Yeah, January 25th, and it's Saturday, and it's 11:30 in the morning. I'm not going to waste much time with an introduction. Essentially, we're just going to be continuing from where I left off in the last video. But first and foremost, as an introduction, those of you who have, you just finished watching the last episode, because I told you it's going to be between 6 and 10 hours, right? So it's all going to be split up into between 4 and 5 episodes, as I share it on YouTube. So I'm just saying right now, I'm assuming for you as the viewer, you watched the previous one. And so you're aware of everything I shared, right? So if you're aware of everything I shared, you could understand, be like, Brandon, you are really putting your life on the line with this. And you might be somebody who's kind of worried about me stepping on camera and being willing to talk about this. Because you might be, at this point, you might really see that I'm really, I'm fighting against some pretty evil forces, right? And so if you can acknowledge that they're pretty evil and that they're out there, well, it's like, Brandon, it's just you, man. It's just you. You really think you can take them on? Like, that's really dangerous of you, really bold of you or whatever. Well, I'm just letting you know, I'm not alone. So whatever you perceive about me, I'm not alone. So I have a lot of friends and support, which is how I'm still alive. My friends and support, part of the game is they are literally staying outside of my field of vision. So I could be surrounded by friends and supporters, but they're literally hiding in plain sight just so that I don't know about them. And if I don't know about them, there's a good chance the bad guys out there, they might not know about them. So it's kind of this thing. I have full faith and trust in the friends and support that I have, and that they're very good at what they do. So there's that. And then secondly, right, Dan, everybody who's connected to Dan, Kelly, and my father, Jerry, between the three of them, as far as I'm aware, they have already made multiple attempts on my life and, my dog too, trying to assassinate me or make me disappear. And so with that knowledge that they are already trying and have tried to do this, there's really nothing holding me back from getting on camera and spilling the beans as far as these things that I have been wanting to talk about for a long time, but I've just been waiting for the right time, the correct time. And after these past almost 7 months of being in my van and, everything else that's happened around the last few years or so, it's all been building up to this moment to where now, after these three individuals who I have named and everybody connected to their web, they have not only exposed themselves, but they've made it pretty clear that they, by trying to murder me or kill my dog, they've made it clear what their intentions are, and the fact that they have not succeeded with their plan, and I'm still alive. Not only am I still alive, but I've caught on to what they're up to. So my awareness that they're already trying and have been trying, well, there's nothing really holding me back from, speaking on camera and telling you guys about all this stuff that's inside my brain, all my memories and everything that's inside my brain, that I've been waiting for the perfect opportunity to reveal certain pieces of this puzzle to you as the viewer, especially if you're law enforcement, if you're law enforcement or military, any combination of the two. If you're somebody who's part of this investigation, or you're currently in the fight you're on the good side and you're currently in the fight somewhere out there in the country or somewhere in the world, and you're helping, you're doing your part to fight against these wicked, evil individuals, right? So the fact that I'm still alive after everything that they've tried, well, there's nothing holding me back from filling all of you in, filling everybody in on things that I know that may have previously been hidden from you, or maybe you've been lied to or misled or manipulated. Whatever the case may be for your current situation, I don't know that, but you do. But now you as the viewer, you're starting to see a lot more of what's actually happening. You can see a lot more of these moving parts, and you're starting to be able to identify these evil people and sadistic people, these psychopaths that are out there that are pulling the strings in the background. They're essentially trying to stay hidden. They're trying to keep their presence. They don't want anybody knowing that they exist, and at the same time, they are directly creating mayhem and chaos all over the place. And they're just trying to hide and stay hidden so that nobody can catch on to their existence. And then everybody else, we're all just blaming each other, trying to figure out what's going on. And now there's a lot of people who might actually know what's going on. It just depends on how long you've been tuned into me and whether or not, these things have been revealed to you yet or not. It just depends on you. And so, I'm just letting you know, as far as if you watch this last video and you're concerned about my well-being, as far as my safety, by me confronting these individuals on camera, and you're worried about them coming after me, well, understand, I very much am aware, and I'm also just reminding you that I'm not alone. I'm protected in ways that I'm not even going to talk about on camera, but I'm protected. That doesn't mean I'm invincible and things can't go south. Things can go south, but right now I've been doing a pretty good job, and my friends and supporters, they've been doing a pretty good job, and I'm still going, right? So that should just be a. Sorry, there's a lot of traffic kind of where I'm parked, so I might get distracted with some loud vehicles. But, if you are a friend or supporter and you know about me, this is just kind of like a little bit of a motivational booster, maybe boost your energy up a little bit, let you know I'm okay, I know what I'm doing, and at the same time, I'm not afraid to die. It's happened, whether or not you believe me or whether or not you're aware, you actually know it's happened, right? You've witnessed it happen, and so some people have witnessed it happen, and they know it's real. But I'm just saying, I've crossed over a few times. I'm aware of what's there and what's on the other side, so I'm just letting you know, as far as my life, I've given my life towards this fight, this cause, to try and help people break free from the darkness and these bad forces that are out there. I've given my life towards it, so everything, all my goals and ambitions and everything that I, in my past, all these things I wanted to accomplish in my life, it's not that I don't want to do these things, it's all put on the back burner right now, because I understand what's important, and I also, just because of the path I've walked, I'm aware of myself and what I have to bring to the table in order to get this situation and issue dealt with. And so, yeah, I've sacrificed my entire life towards this cause, and in the process of doing that, I've become reunited with Heavenly Father, the angels, and these higher realms, knowing that they're there, knowing that they're watching out for me. And if something bad does happen or did happen, from what has been communicated with me and what I have learned, I've earned my ticket out. So if things go south, I kind of came out weird. If things go south, as far as my life or this reality for everybody, if things just go south, I will have earned my ticket to go home and not be part of this. And so, with that understanding and my faith in that, and the fact that I've survived everything that's been thrown at me, I can walk through this valley of death, this scary place as the world currently stands, and address these scary things that are happening and point my finger at those who I perceive are responsible, at least in the context of how my life ended up going the direction that it did. I've caught people, and so, you know, me stepping on camera, I have no qualms with sharing this with whoever you are to help you see the big picture. So if you find yourself in a bad situation, I'm essentially giving you a light. There's a light. I'm showing you this light at the end of the tunnel, letting you know that it is possible to get away from these individuals, letting you know that it is possible to find a redemption and get your way out of this scary reality that we're all living in together. This realm, this third dimension, Earth, whatever you want, you know, there's a whole bunch of different names that you call it. You know, even if you go back hundreds of years, the word Earth, you know, the names have always been changing through time. So it's like, don't be too attached with this idea of where you think you live, because this reality might not be what you think it is. And so that's this whole point of becoming self-aware, and becoming aware, not only self-aware of who you are, but becoming aware of who your peers are, you know, what they're doing here, and what this reality is and what it isn't. So there's this whole process for your own self, just like it's been for me. And I'm just letting you know, don't be worried about me. I mean, I've had a lot of messed up stuff happen, but I'm okay. You know, it's a lot for me to process. But you know, if you're on my friend or family, friends, supporters, whatever, and you're on my side and you've been concerned about me, I'm okay. You know, it's a lot, but I'm fine. So it's okay. Which means it's okay for you. You know, it's okay for you. And I'm just saying, if something bad does happen to me in the context of once I get this information delivered, if I end up dying, death is not the end. Death itself is just a transition, where if I end up getting murdered, if you believe in your spirit and your soul, if you see my dead body on the ground, you find out I got murdered, don't trip out, man, because my spirit is essentially out of my body, and I could still be in this reality with you. You just can't see me, or I could be up in these higher realities looking down or whatever, and this is where you might be devastated or upset that I'm not around anymore, but I'm not actually gone, which means at some point you're going to remember, you got to focus on yourself, and you got to look at your own inner self and make sure you are in spiritual alignment, so that where you can walk the rest of your life. You know, you don't know when your ticket's going to be called, when your death day is going to come, but we all die. So if you just understand that death is just a transitionary period, death might be uncomfortable, but it's just a transition. And so long as you have faith in Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ, and you've been doing your best to live your best life, it's not too hard. You can keep it pretty simple. You know, you got faith in Jesus, you got faith in Heavenly Father, and you're doing your best. You're doing your best, and you're also willing to confess and acknowledge your own mistakes, and try not to make those mistakes anymore. As long as you're doing that at a basic, you should be good to go. Where at some point, say I die in the next week or couple weeks, but at some point as long as you got yourself good to go, the next thing you know, we might end up crossing paths in a different place. And because you found the truth and you're saved, well, you just got to ride out your ride. You don't get to choose when you're out, but when your date comes, as long as you maintain your faith and do your best, and you're vibrating at the correct frequency, when your ticket's called, well, you'll be home before you know it, man. This life comes and goes faster than you think, and depending on how old you are, you can say yes or no to this. It's kind of like the older you get, it kind of just seems like time starts moving faster. When you were a child, every single day when you woke up, the day seemed really long. Days were really long, but then as you got older and life started catching up with you and you got busy with everything, the next thing you know, your days were just coming and going faster than you could keep up. Or the next thing, weeks pass or months pass, and you're just like, wow, that month went by really fucking quick. So that's a thing. This is just kind of my introduction. But otherwise, we're going to be continuing from where we left off with the last episode. So, the last episode kind of ended in a scary place. So I'm going to be taking us back into that scary place. I just had to remind you about these positive things before we jump back into these scary things that have happened in the past, right? So I've wiped off the board. So if you remember what the board looked like from the last time, I wiped it down. And I've just, this is our starting point. I'm going to cut the camera and reposition here in a moment, but I'm just, before I cut, this is our starting point. Again, we're focusing on this time frame from March 2018 until around the time I got arrested in the middle of September 2019, so about a year and a half later. So this is, right now we're focusing on this year and a half time span, and once the video cuts and we start, we're still going to be in this, the month of March. It's about a 2-month time span. So from March and April, we're right around at the beginning of May is when I left Las Vegas. Okay, so we're still going to be hanging out around this little portion for a while, and then eventually we're going to start making our way towards about right here. These next about 2 or 3 hours is probably just going to be covering this portion, and then when this video ends, probably, I'm hoping I'm going to try and get all the information compacted in this next 3 hours for this portion. And then we're going to be talking about other stuff. But again, if you remember from the last video, the focus, the overall focus, like the key points and the key topics of this overall discussion is showing you how Dan, Kelly, and Jerry are all linked together in the context of what happened to me and my life and how things just got out of control. And so these videos are to be showing you those connections, and at the same time, remember, I'm going to be talking about magic mushrooms quite a bit, because it's all connected. And especially when we get past all of this, when we get past this portion, this part of the timeline, and we start looking at a late, 2024 and the second half of 2023 and the entire year of 2024. This is where we're really going to be, a lot of these pieces, everything I've been sharing with you, a lot of these things are going to start coming together. And then at the same time, a lot of things are going to start making sense for you as far as why my current situation is as it currently is. So there's a lot for me to continue talking about. 10 hours might not even, that might be underbidding what I'm guessing. It might end up turning into something more than 10 hours. So I'm just saying that now because I'm really good at saying something's going to only be this long and I end up doubling or tripling the length. So mentally, just be prepared. If you want to know about this story, well, I'm going to be getting into in-depth with all of this. So if you enjoy my storytelling and you like acting as a detective, remember, I'm inviting you to be a detective. Try to solve the mysteries. There's a lot of mysteries, like a murder mystery. So, except this is real life stuff. So, this is real life stuff. So there's real life consequences. These individuals are out there, but I'm just saying for you as a viewer, in order to help you make it through this without getting too emotionally upset, just try to put yourself in a neutral state. Try to keep your emotions on the side and just look at it like it's a murder mystery and see if you can figure these things out, okay? So that's where I'm going to stop. So, I'm just my prayer, my prayer is the same as it was in the last video, that, I get guidance from Heavenly Father and my, angels to help me through this and guide me so that you can learn what you need to learn. But otherwise, everything I'm sharing with you, I'm just speaking on the fly. This is not scripted. This is not pre-planned. I'm just going to be telling you what's up, okay? Just try to. And so as I cut, we're going to be right back here from, right where the video left off. And I told you about like Joe and Dan. I introduced these people to you, right? So you're aware of Joe. You're aware of what happened to Joe. But even though I told you what happened to Joe, it was like around July or August or something when he died, when he got murdered. We're going to be going back to like March and April time frame because there's still a little bit more I got to share with you about Dan and his wife. And then about DMT and mushrooms and a little bit more on that. So hang on to your pants because this is going to take off really quick. Okay. Okay. I've said I've said a few different times that I was gonna talk about Dan's wife, Jamie, and I feel like now is probably an appropriate time to kind of give you guys a little bit of a background about what I learned about her. I don't know much about Jamie, so I can't say really much about what her life's been like. I can't tell you about her experiences. I can't tell you what's been going on in her brain as far as her perception of reality and the situation that she finds herself in. I'm only going to be telling you what I learned during my time with them, okay? So, and at the same time, by talking about Jamie, Dan is going to get very fucking upset because he doesn't want people to know anything about his wife that Dan does not selectively want people to know about. So if I'm if I'm telling you guys things that he doesn't want you to know about their relationship, you can imagine, well, given the opportunity, Dan would do something very bad to me as far as violence. So I'm aware of that, but at the same time, again, they've already been trying to get me, and so because they've already revealed that's what they're doing, I can just proceed forward anyways, because it's not really going to make a difference. They're going to continue trying to kill me one way or the other anyway, so why would I walk around afraid of them? Yeah, I'm not. So we're going to be talking about Jamie. So I'm going to write her name, Jamie. Pretty sure this is how she spells it, and that is equals Dan's wife. Dan's wife. So, when I first encountered Jamie, when I mentioned, I think I mentioned in my other videos, like when I first arrived at their house, at Dan's house, I didn't know that he was married, right? When I arrived, I didn't even know he was married. I don't believe it was until after I did the DMT that Jamie kind of just came out of a different room, and she started making her presence known, and that's when kind of Dan started introducing me and telling me about her. So in general, Jamie is she's pretty shy and reserved. She's very quiet, right? And she unless she gets to know you or you spend time around her where she starts, unless she perceives you, if she perceives somebody that she can trust or that you're a friendly person, she opens up and becomes friendly. But for the most part, she's very reserved and doesn't really interact with anybody unless she has a reason to. Okay, so Dan has kept her kind of like hidden and secret to the world. Okay, but I told you that out of 2 months through the month of March and April, I spent about a month total at Dan's house, over not all at the same time, right? And so that means I got to spend one-on-one time with Dan and his wife, where it was just the three of us and nobody else. Okay, so I had access to a lot of personal, private conversations between the three of them, okay, that conversations that they would not have with other people. Okay, so during that time, there was a lot of things that I observed, words that were not said, but essentially observing how Dan and his wife interact amongst each other and the type of relationship that they have. So one of the things, a really big thing that everybody needs to know, when Dan and Jamie met each other and they got in what you call a relationship, Dan was they're like 15 years apart, like their age difference. Like Dan is like 15 years older than Jamie. When Dan met Jamie, Dan was I think he was around 30 years old. He might have been 30, 31 years old. And Jamie was only like 17 or 18 years old. Somewhere around there, okay? I don't know the exact age, but I'm just saying when they met, when Dan met Jamie, Dan was part of like the Hells Angels. Dan told me he used to belong to the Hells Angels, the motorcycle club. And Dan had openly kind of like, kind of as a flex or a brag about being like a white supremacist. So between being a Hell's Angels and like a white supremacist, and telling me about his violent background, because if you remember from my story, other stories, at some point, Dan told me about all these different fights he'd been in, and I asked Dan how many fights he could guess that he's been in his lifetime, and he said he'd been in over 1,000 fights in his life. I asked him how many fights he's lost. He told me none, but I don't know if that's true. I mean, it could be, but it might not be. But he told me he's been in 1,000 fights. Okay, that's a lot of violence. First and foremost, that's a lot of violence. And then the next question is, out of all those fights, how many people have you murdered? I never asked him that question, and I don't have the answer, but I can imagine he's murdered some people. And as I'm describing this to you, I will probably attach some images that I have of the different tattoos that Dan has on his body that he shared on his own Instagram account. So this is something that he publicly shared, and so I'm just resharing it. We'll be resharing it. I'll attach it into the video. So I mean, even just based off his tattoos, just looking at his tattoos, you can see the type of person he is, and that he's very likely a very, very violent individual. For example, on the back of his calf, I think he has a tattoo that says trigger happy. Right? It says trigger happy. So there's that. So I'm saying when Dan met his wife, met Jamie, when Dan met her, he was part of the Hells Angels and was involved with a very violent crowd. And from what I remember, he might have met his wife at a party or something, some type of social gathering or something. And from what he described to me, she's only like 17 or 18 years old. I don't know the circumstances of, how they exactly met. But essentially, Dan described that I heard him tell the story a few times to a few different people. He even told the story to Rabbit. If you know anybody who knows who Rabbit is, well, I was there when Dan even told the story to Rabbit, and Rabbit can even confirm this, and Rabbit even put the pieces together. But Dan essentially tells people that, he kidnapped Jamie. Like, he essentially kidnapped Jamie, where as soon as they started dating and seeing each other, Dan would not allow her to walk away and leave. I don't know any type of words or anything that he has said to her or any type of violence that has happened in the relationship, but Dan established that he essentially kidnapped Jamie, and at the same time he always tried making it seem like he was just trying to protect her. He was just trying to protect her and keep her away from all this other bad stuff that might have happened if he didn't kidnap her, right? So, that's some type of Stockholm syndrome, brainwashing, mind control tactic to try, to put that in her brain. Either way, I don't know what Jamie's life background's like. I don't know where she's been in her life. I don't know the types of things that she had encountered prior to meeting Dan. But all the same, Dan goes around essentially telling people that he kidnapped Jamie, and they had... Sorry, it's noisy. Hell's Angels, man. But yeah, essentially he goes around telling people that he kidnapped her, and then the more time I spent with both of them, there's other things that Dan told me where I can't quote him verbatim, but he essentially established that if Jamie ever tried running and getting away from him, or if somebody ever tried rescuing her and separating the two of them, that Dan would find her, find out where she went, and he would get her back, like, no matter what. So he was, like, letting me know, like, Dan would go to whatever extremes, even if it involves murdering people, in order to get Jamie back into his life. So, that's a kind of a scary thing. So with, Jamie knows all this stuff, so she probably knows that Dan's not kidding when he says this stuff, so that's a big part of why she's never, as far as I'm aware, I don't know if she's ever ran, I don't know if she's ever tried getting away, maybe she has, and people have died because these things have already happened, and that's why Jamie's still there with him. I don't know, but, these are things that I I observed and learned, and also things that Dan shared with me. And adding to all of that, as Dan starts telling me, as he told me about his relationship with his wife, he started using this analogy, or this metaphor, if you were to look at his relationship with his wife, Jamie. And that's when he started telling me that the story Beauty and the Beast, if you've watched the Disney story and you know the story Beauty and the Beast, Dan claimed that story was based off of his and Jamie's relationship, where essentially Dan is like this beast and Jamie is like a prisoner of his that ended up in his possession and she's no longer allowed to leave. But Dan had confessed to me a few different times that Dan has said that he is ashamed of what he's done as far as kidnapping his wife. But behind it all, after their entire time together, Dan was telling me that he is hoping at some point that Jamie will fall in love with him. He established that she doesn't love him, and that he's, even though Jamie is essentially his prisoner, Dan has been trying to give her a good life and protect her and give her whatever she wants as far as material stuff. And so he's been trying to make Jamie fall in love with him. I don't know where I have no idea where their relationship has gone since I last crossed paths with Dan in January 2019. I have no idea. Since the last time I've seen those two, I have no idea where they have gone nor what has happened during their marriage. But I'm just telling you about what I learned during my time together. Okay, so Jamie has essentially been a prisoner of his, and so and where I'm going with this is, how I told you that Dan and I kept doing DMT, like we kept taking turns doing DMT, right? Over this month that I spent with Dan, and each time that I would come back to Las Vegas and spend a week at his house, well, at some point during each of my visits, each of us would do DMT. And at some point, because Dan and I kept going back and forth, at some point Dan wanted Jamie to try DMT. Up until a certain point, Jamie, even though Dan had been smoking it for a little bit, for over a period over a couple months, Jamie had always just been an observer, where she would just watch her husband, Dan, smoke it, and then she would just watch after him to make sure nothing bad happened, right? But otherwise, she was hands off, had nothing to do with it. But at the same time, at some point, Dan started pressuring her a little bit, trying to get her to smoke DMT. And at some point, she agreed and said yes. So this is where things got really revealed to me, where I learned things that Dan would not want shared with all of you as the viewers. So that's the critical point of this is I saw things, but when it was just Dan, Jamie, and I saw things, heard things, and witnessed things that nobody else beyond the three of us saw or witnessed. Which means if you don't know about it, I do, and I'm telling you what happened, right? So when Jamie smoked DMT, I'm sitting on the couch, like Dan has like this, I forget the name of it's like a big, long, L-shaped couch. I forget the name of those types of couches. So I'm sitting on one side of the couch, and then Jamie's sitting on the opposite end of the couch, and we're kind of like facing each other, right? Because it's an L-shaped couch. Or, I'll just draw it, so just imagine this is a couch, right? And I'm sitting right here, and Jamie's sitting right here, okay? So Dan comes up, he's got the DMT bong, it's like a bong to smoke dabs out of, if you know what marijuana dabs, cannabis, if you're smoking dabs, you can smoke DMT out of a bong just like you're smoking dabs. So he has it all prepped, and he gives the DMT to his wife. So she's sitting right here, and she smokes it, and then Dan, after Dan gives it to her, he steps back, and so essentially he's standing over here. They have their kitchen. So this is their kitchen. This is like the island. So you say the kitchen. This is all the kitchen right here. And this is like a little island, where like a counter space. So Dan's like standing over by the counter space, watching his wife, and I'm watching her. And so as soon as Jamie hit the DMT and it kicked in, well, she was too afraid. She was terrified to open her eyes, and she just kept her eyes closed like she was hiding and didn't want to look at what was outside of her. And from what I remember, at some point she like kind of like opened her eyes and started looking around, and she was terrified, and then she closed her eyes again. And I don't remember everything that happened. I mean, it wasn't like, as far as me watching her, there wasn't anything big or eventful that happened. But that's something I observed, where she was just scared of opening her eyes, and then when she did, she was looking around and she was scared, and she just decided to keep her eyes closed. Okay, well, when the DMT wore off, and then she was back in reality, you know, back in her sober state of mind, well, when she started, you know, articulating and telling Dan and I what she saw and experienced, well, imagine this is Jamie. You know, I'm just a stick figure, right? So this is Jamie. What Jamie saw when she tapped into these other frequencies, what she saw was essentially she was in this fiery orange cage. You know, imagine like a bird. Imagine like being a bird in a cage. Well, Jamie saw herself in this this fiery orange cage, like she was stuck in this fiery cage, and she was trapped in there, you know, and she was trapped in there, and then she saw herself trapped, and at the same time she acknowledged that she was trapped because Dan kidnapped her. So Jamie has essentially been his prisoner for a very long time, and in these, you know, if you were able to adjust your eyes and your frequency to be able to see these other frequencies, wherever those two are at, Jamie might be surrounded by some type of fiery cage, where she's trapped by some type of dark magic or witchcraft or sorcery. I don't know, but that's what Jamie experienced. She experienced herself inside of an orange cage, and Dan was her captive. Okay, so that's a pretty scary thing to think about, and I was there to witness it. So I'm telling you, that's what his wife's, I don't know how many, as far as I'm aware, she's only done DMT one time, and that was her one time. That was her experience. I don't know if she's done it more than that. You know, I have no way of knowing that. But for you as a viewer, this is information, you know, if you're in law enforcement or military, this is something that is vital information for you to know who Dan's wife is. Well, not only did he kidnap her when she was only 17 or 18 years old, and he was 15 years older than her, and he was riding with the Hells Angels, well, that's kidnapping, right? You know, that's a form of kidnapping. And then the fact that if you were able to separate her from Dan, and Jamie sincerely believed that she was safe and had the ability to get away from Dan, well, maybe she would tell you the truth about how she really feels, and she might be absolutely terrified of Dan, but she just doesn't see any way of getting out, so she's kind of just accepted it, and she just goes with the flow. Whatever Dan's got going on, whatever he wants to do, whatever his overall, if he's giving the final say so, she just lets it go. So that's what I'm kind of aware of, and that's kind of these pieces I've put together. And to add to this, to make this even more worse, to make it worse, during my time spent with them during March and April, and even the following year when I caught up with Dan and Jamie again, there were times when I noticed when there were days when Jamie was wearing like a t-shirt or like a short sleeve sweatshirt like I was, or, you know, I can't remember if she ever wore shorts, but I remember seeing bruises all over her skin. Like she had bruises all over her arms, and I feel like if I remember correctly, I think I remember seeing, she might have been wearing shorts or something, but I think she had bruises on her legs too. And it didn't look right to me. It looked like bruises as if you've been getting abused by somebody. You know, somebody's been hitting you or grabbing you very hard and violently holding on to you and stuff. You know, just grabbing onto you, and that could leave a bruise. And so, just based off Jamie's DMT experience, based off the bruises that I saw, based off of the story Dan told me about kidnapping her, and based off just observing Jamie's behavior, as far as she's just really shy and quiet, and she just comes off as somebody that's really really shy, quiet, and reserved. And that's just concerning for me. You know, if she's somebody in a bad situation, well, how do you get somebody out of that situation? Well, you're going to have to confront the person who's put her in that situation. And if Dan is somebody that's not like everybody else, well, you're going to have to tread carefully on how you go about doing it if he's connected to very violent people and violent, people that are connected. You know, he has affiliations with different groups and organizations, and within those groups and organizations you have murderers and rapists and child traffickers, human traffickers, some really bad people. And so you can't help his wife unless you're willing to go after all of these individuals who are part of it, right? So if Dan is the shot caller, you know, when I told you guys about the Lion's Den, Dan would go to this place called the Lion's Den. It was like a club, an exclusive club that him and Jamie would go to, you know, maybe a couple times a month, I don't know. But Dan told me that he was the head guy at the Lion's Den, at the table, where, yeah, everybody talks about their ideas and different things, but when it comes down to decision making, Dan had the final say so. And if Dan didn't like something, that it wouldn't happen, you know. So these are things I learned about him, okay. And there's so much I can just add, and you know, there's only a few more things that are even really worth mentioning before I feel like I kind of got to just kind of start moving forward. The next really is pretty significant. I mean, it's a pretty significant piece to the puzzle, you know, something that you need to know about if you don't. Well, there's I don't know, it might have been like the third or fourth time that I watched Dan do DMT. You know, again, like, I'm sitting right here, you know, rather than this being Jamie, imagine Dan's the one that's sitting there, and I'm just sitting here observing him. And then whenever it was that Dan was doing DMT, Jamie would usually just hang out in the kitchen watching him, just watching Dan have his experience. So again, imagine this is Dan, that's me, and that's Jamie. So, and this was like, imagine this is like the third or fourth time that I watched Dan do DMT. It might have been maybe the fifth or sixth time, I don't remember. It all kind of just blends together, and it was also a while ago. Sorry, it's kind of weird sometimes, these noisy trucks that kind of just seem like they linger to kind of distract me. These noisy vehicles are really distracting. But I'm saying is, one of the times that I watched Dan do DMT, I don't know where he went as far as, you know, when he smoked it and then he went to some other reality or something. But what happened when he tapped into something, and while he was fully under the influence of the DMT, he just all of a sudden, it was like the entire energy in the house, the entire energy of his house shifted, and it got really dark. Like, all of a sudden there was this really dark energy that just came into the house, and all of a sudden Dan shouted. He was like, "It's great to be back!" Like he full on shouted that, like, "It's great to be back," in this really deep, scary voice. And it was almost like it wasn't Dan's voice. Maybe it was Dan's inner self being reunited with, you know, it's like him, like he's being reunited with himself, and wherever his real self has been, and it, like, you know, maybe in a state of slumber or sealed away somewhere, it was almost like the real Dan, or maybe the devil, or, you know, Lucifer, or some dark entity or demon. It could have been just a demon, fallen angel, I don't know, but something was brought back from somewhere, and Dan was reunited with it. And that happened, and I was sitting there when that happened. I had no idea what the fuck was going on. All of a sudden the energy in the house changed, and Dan shouted that. And all of a sudden, like, I look over at Jamie, and she looks over at me, and Jamie has this really concerned look on her face. Is just like me. We're like, what the fuck just happened? Like, we had no idea what just happened, and her and I are just looking at each other like, holy shit. And, you know, Dan yelled that. I don't remember what happened after that. I don't believe he yelled anything, but I think he yelled it, and then he kind of just like went into his own space again where, you know, he's somewhere else. And, you know, he might have started like looking around at us or something, but he got real quiet, and then I don't really remember much more about his DMT right after that. But that's a very important puzzle piece for you as the viewer to know that this happened back in 2018. It was like March or April 2018 when Dan was reunited with something, his inner self or with Satan himself. I don't know, but I think, you know, this goes into like the spiritual realm. This isn't just something to take lightly. We're talking about demonic forces and you know, fallen angels and that type of, that's what we're dealing with. Kind of something really dark and scary. And so I'm just letting you know to tread carefully, whoever you are. Dan, you know, remember I told you before, I've seen Dan's eyes turn fully black. I think it was like, again, like the first time I watched him do DMT, I saw his eyes turn fully black. And then the next thing I want to add to all of this before we continue moving forward, I may have mentioned it before, but it's another, if I have, it's worth mentioning it again, but if I haven't, this is another thing for you to know about. That first, you know, when I first got there, when I first arrived to Las Vegas, and I stayed at Dan's place with him and his wife for 3 or 4 days or whatever. On my last day there, before I continued on my road trip down to Sedona, down into Arizona, right? My last day there, like I left like in the late morning, but that morning I ended up meeting up with Dan and his wife at some coffee shop. Like him and his wife would go to a coffee shop. It was just like a coffee shop that they would go to regularly just to be out in public, right? I think I might have mentioned this before. And so when I ended up, like, I met up with them. They got there before I did because I went and took Malaki for his run and got him some exercise that morning, and then I went and caught up with Dan and his wife at the coffee shop. And so remember, this was just when I was just still getting to know Dan, and a lot of this stuff I've shared with you had not really happened yet, so I was still in the process of figuring things out. So this is only like the 3rd or 4th day, right? So I'm leaving that later that morning, but I'm just meeting up with them to have coffee, and then I'm out, right? And then I'll catch up with them in a few weeks when I get back from my road trip. So when I go into the coffee shop and I sit down at the table with Dan, you know, there's like a little tiny coffee table. Just imagine, here, just like, here's the coffee table, you know, this is a coffee table right here, and there's the legs. So there's a table, and then here's your chair. So you got your chair, and so then you got another chair over here. So you got your chair. So there's your table, and you got your chair. And so I'm, you know, imagine that's Dan, right? That's Dan. And then this is me, you know, I'm sitting here. So we're sitting across from each other at this table, and Jamie's sitting at a table over here. So she's just sitting, the tables are right next to each other, and she's just sitting there, and she's like on her phone, like doing stuff on Instagram or something, or reading. I don't remember what she was doing. But otherwise, Dan and I were having a one-on-one conversation, face-to-face. And while we're sitting there talking to each other, that's when, you know, because we're talking and I'm looking Dan in the eyes as I'm talking to him, and he's looking me in the eyes as he's talking to me. And it was at that point in time when I noticed that Dan's pupils, the pupils of his eyes were different than a normal person's eyes, where the pupils of his eyes almost looked like they were vertical, like a cat or a snake, right? And I kind of honed in on it, you know. I was like, holy, wait, what? What's up with your eyes? You know, I'm thinking this, I'm like, notice it, and so I'm in my head thinking like, dude, what's up with his eyes? And then at some point it just became, I couldn't keep it in. I just asked him, I was like, Dan, what's up with your eyes, man? They're different. And he acknowledged it. He's like, yeah. And then I asked him, I was like, Dan, can I get closer and look at your eyes? Like, you know, can I get closer and look at you? So, you know, we both lean in. Dan leans in towards me. So we're like, you know, him and I were like this close to each other, just staring each other in the eyes. And I'm like, Dan, your eyes are vertical. They're like slits, man. And he's like, yes. after I got a good look, he leans back and I lean back, and then we just proceed talking. And he tells me, he acknowledges that yes, they're vertical, and then he told me that they've always been that way through his entire siren. I'll wait for that to pass. But when Dan started telling me about it, he told me that his eyes have always been that way. Even like as a child, his pupils have always been that way. And he told me that as he was growing up, through his childhood and as a teenager, the friends that he had one friend or a mentor tell him that he always needs to be smoking weed or wearing sunglasses in order to make his pupils expand. That way people won't get suspicious of him he might not actually be human. He might be like a fallen angel or something that's, right? He might be Satan himself, right? That's kind of what I've been hinting towards. He's gonna be one of the fallen ones, one of the forsaken. But, he's had somebody tell him to smoke weed in order to not give away his position to those who don't know about this type of stuff. Well, in order to conceal that from people who don't know, that's what his friend told him. He always needs to be smoking weed and everything. And so that's something Dan passed on to me, and that was a real conversation I had with him, okay? So that's one more thing. How much time do I got left? I got 8 minutes on my clock. Trying to think any more really crazy stuff that I need to add before we start moving on. Probably not, and if there is, I will let you know. So essentially, I already told you, when after about 2 months of being in Las Vegas area, I ended up leaving and returning back to Central Oregon, right? I told you, I have Milwaukee with me, and I told Dan that I can't stay in Las Vegas, even though Dan was trying to get me to move in with him. I told Dan I can't stay in Las Vegas during the summertime because it's going to be too hot for my dog, so I told Dan that I got to go north for the summertime where it's cooler, go in these higher elevations, not in the desert. And then I made Dan a promise that I would catch up with him again at some point. And I did catch up with him again not January. It was I think it was the end of February, early March of 2019. So I met up with Dan again about 1 year later, okay? So with that said, I'm going to kind of just be we're going to be concluding this portion. This part's going to kind of come to an end. There's more I can always tell you, but again, I'm just trying to help you make these connections, showing you how Jerry, Dan, and Kelly are connected, and then we're going to, talking about psychedelics, mushrooms, and things that I've tapped into and have learned about this type of stuff. So that's where we're heading, and so I got to take a little bit of a break and get a drink of water and all that. So there you go. Alrighty, next order of business. I took like a 15-minute break, and during that 15 minutes I had a few more things pop into my brain. So before we continue with the story and I tell you what happened after leaving Las Vegas, there's a few more critical connections I need to let you know about as far as puzzle pieces to give you. I'm going to help you connect a few more vital information you need to know, right? So, during my last week, it was around the last week that I spent at Dan's place. If you guys remember back in 2019 when I was arrested, when I was arrested back here, or up here, about a year and a half later, when I got arrested, the police, they took a handgun, a machete, and 2 knives, and a case full of a case full of ammunition. Sorry, there's noisy vehicles still. And they took a case full of ammunition for the handgun. Okay, so when I got arrested, then, you know, the police took a bunch of weapons that I had on me. I had, before I got arrested, so you think about around this time, I think it was around July of 2019, I had been going to the police department trying to get help. I was trying to report Dan and Kelly, and I was trying to go to the Redmond Police Department. Remember, my dad Jerry, his father was chief of police in Redmond, and I had a background with the Redmond Police Department and some of the officers that still worked there at the time. You know, when I was a cadet and an explorer back from 2006 through 2008, well, I made friendships and relationships, like, you know, connections with officers within the Redmond Police Department. Some of them, they were officers, and I was just I was a nobody. I was an explorer / cadet. So it's not like I was a police officer. So essentially, you know, they were my, you know, I had a boss within the Redmond Police Department, but all the officers, they all could tell me what to do. You know, I looked up to all of them, and I developed different types of friendships with some of those officers. So that was back in 2006 through 2008. Well, in 2019, some of those officers were still working with the Redmond Police Department, okay? So they were still working with the Redmond Police Department, and many of them knew my grandpa, or, you know, many of them had known who my grandpa was, so by default, they also know about my family. You know, probably my uncle, who is retired state police, and also my father, Jerry, who, you know, don't really know what he's doing. As far as the truth ever being told to me is about what he's up to, all I have known is that he has been involved with construction, you know, so he's just a construction worker, right? But all the same, his entire family is connected to law enforcement. So I'm saying, before I got arrested in 2019, so we're talking about July or August or something, I was going to the Redmond Police Department, trying to report Dan and Kelly, trying to go to these Redmond officers to tell them about this stuff that I have, you know, this stuff that has happened, and things that I've experienced, and these people I've met and have crossed paths with who were now trying to make me disappear. And during that time when I was trying to report these people, I had a handgun and knives and a case full of ammunition that I tried surrendering to the FBI and Redmond Police Department, but they would not. They turned me away and allowed me to walk away with these weapons. And not only did they allow me to walk away with these weapons in my possession, you know, they wouldn't take them from me. They also were not going after Dan or Kelly for whatever reasons. I have no idea why, but that's what happened. And so right now I'm trying to help you connect make these connections right now. So that happened here. And if you're somebody who knows, you're aware of me and what happened to me around this time, and you're aware of the weapons, or maybe you're not. Maybe you have no idea about the weapons until now. Well, I'm saying all the way back here, March and April 2018. Well, it was around the last week, my last week that I spent at Dan's place before I returned to Oregon. Well, that's when Dan literally gave me a handgun. I didn't even have to buy it from him. He gave it to me. He gave it to me and told me it's to defend myself in case I cross paths with somebody that tries doing something. Well, he told me I could use it to defend myself, but at the same time, if I ever use it, I have to get rid of it. You know, like dispose of the gun. You know, if I end up killing somebody, well, Dan would not want it to be linked back to him, so he's like, you know, essentially I have to get rid of the gun. But I never used the gun. You know, he gave me a gun, and he gave me a pretty big knife, and he gave me an AK-47 bayonet, you know, like a knife. Not an AK-47, but a bayonet that would fit onto an AK-47. So he gave me 2 big knives, a handgun, and a bunch of ammunition, right? And then also at the same time, he and the mushrooms and the DMT came from Joe, but everything was happening through Dan. And Dan essentially sent me on my way back to Oregon with, I had, I don't know, an ounce or two of mushrooms and a gram of DMT that I returned to Central Oregon with, as well as a handgun and 2 knives. And then you think about all the stuff he put in my brain. So I had just done DMT like 10 times over a period of 2 months. And so remember, they had also told me when I first arrived Dan had told me that I had a hit on my life when I first arrived. So when I actually left and went back to Central Oregon, well, whoever had put the hit on my life, they probably were not really expecting to see me again, right? I've already mentioned this. They weren't expecting me to see me again, but at the same time, I was back. If it was my family or specific members within my family who had made a deal to have, some type of deal to have me assassinated. I don't know. I mean, whoever was involved, as far as if it was somebody within my family. I'm saying when I returned back to Redmond, Oregon, after this 2-month span in Las Vegas, when I returned back to Oregon, there were people in my family that just the energy that I was picking up, it was like they were not expecting to see me again. And then they were treating me much different than any other time in my life, as if they knew things, but they weren't telling me what. They were just treating me different. Even though supposedly they didn't know anything about what just happened. Supposedly, because I'd never told them, they didn't, they should have had no knowledge of what actually happened in Las Vegas. So therefore, they should have no reason to be treating me different, because from there, based off what I've told people, all I've been doing is, on a road trip, have been going on to all these national parks and doing photography. For the most part, I haven't told anybody about some of this stuff. Maybe I did a little bit, maybe I didn't. I don't really remember much about that time as far as when I started telling people about my experiences in Las Vegas and when I started talking about Dan at all. I don't remember when I started revealing that, but I'm just saying when I first arrived back home, everybody was treating me different, as if they knew what happened, even though I hadn't told them, and at the same time they weren't expecting to ever see me again, because some of them might have made a deal to have me assassinated. Okay, and so with that, all that had happened, and at the same time, when I did return to Central Oregon, I had a handgun and I had knives that Dan had given me. And so that's a key piece for things that happened up here. And at the same time, right, I'm really close to where we're shifting gears. But the last thing that I really need to mention about Dan and my time in Las Vegas, well, the handgun that he gave me and the knives that he gave me, those were kind of just like, from my time spent with him, I learned that Dan was a weapon collector. He likes guns and he likes knives and he likes like military grade gadgets, and he showed me all types of, a lot of his toys that he had, either hidden around the house or just stored in his closets. But as far as Dan's background, his life background of being a very violent person, I'm not sure what Dan's criminal record is as far as being a convicted felon or not. I don't know what his rap sheet is as far as any time he has spent locked up. I have no idea, and I don't know that part. But I'm just saying, if he was a convicted felon at the time that I met him, if he was a convicted felon at that time, I'm telling you that Dan had like an entire house full of not just guns, but knives and ammunition, but all types of other military grade equipment. So to begin with, as far as what I can remember, I think he had handguns. He had like a Glock or a 45 or something. He had a handgun hidden inside the little glove or the little storage compartment inside of his couch. There's that little flip up thing where you can store things inside your couch. Well, he had a handgun in that. I'm pretty sure he carried a handgun on his side, whether on his ankle or his waist or both. And so those were the first guns I became aware of. And then eventually Dan showed me a shotgun that he kept stored next to his bed. So when he sleeps at night, he told me, if somebody breaks in or he hears something, well, he's got a shotgun right next to his bed. And then he told me about the different type of ammunition he had in his shotgun. It was like, I can't remember if it was an 8-round shotgun, like a combat shotgun where the ammunition was is not restricted, so he could fit like 6 to 8 shells or something. Well, he told me like the first 2 shells, or the first shell was like a beanbag round, and then he said like the third and fourth shell I think he said it was like buckshot, and then the last rounds were like slugs. So he told me, that it just depends on what he's dealing with. If it's just somebody he can, if he can just take him down with a beanbag round, well, he'll take him down with a beanbag round. But if the threat continues coming, well, he'll shoot him with buckshot. And if the threat continues coming, he'll hit him with a slug, as far as his shotgun. And then, so I acted all really interested on this. He let me hold his shotgun. I actually held his shotgun, and he allowed me to go into his bedroom and showed me his stuff. And so his shotgun was the first thing, and then he started showing me rifles, different types of rifles he has. I don't remember what types of rifles he has. As far as the types of rifles, the most that I can remember were scoped rifles for long range, like long range rifles, single action, right, or bolt action. As far as automatic rifles, I can't remember that part. I don't know if he showed me any automatic rifles, but beyond that, eventually he showed me his closet full. He had a closet full of all different types of ammunition, from large caliber to small caliber, like ammunition for handgun all the way to ammunition for rifles. He had armor-piercing ammunition, so if you are wearing Kevlar, he had ammunition that could pierce through Kevlar. So if you're a police officer and you're wearing Kevlar, well, the bullets that Dan would be using against you will go through your Kevlar, and your Kevlar will not save your life. So Dan has a whole bunch of that type of ammunition in his possession. And then he showed me a military-grade night vision goggles that he owned, and he showed me a door breaching kit. If you want to knock down somebody's front door, like one of those sledgehammers or whatever. He had a door breaching kit. So he had all kinds of knives, and he had was that a slapjack or a blackjack? Those. It's like a little fabric. It's a little fabric thing you can hold that has like 2 metal balls in it, and you can swat and hit somebody in the skull with it, and it'll break their skull. He had all different types of things. He had ninja stars, things to kill for murdering, right? So he showed me all of this stuff, and then because I acted interested, and remember Dan was playing this. He was trying to brainwash me and eventually get me to join him and pledge allegiance to him or submit to him, whatever. That was his overall agenda. And so when he started introducing his guns to me, because I was acting interested and asking to see more, well, he wanted to show me more, and because he was showing me more, there's more stuff I'm learning. And in Dan's mind, he is thinking that he's getting me, right? And then after he shows me all of his guns, that's when he decided to give me this little tiny handgun. He's like, well, this is where Dan is trying to make me feel like, oh, well, Dan trusts me to give me a handgun, and therefore I should trust Dan, because he's trying to make me feel like he's trying to keep me safe by allowing me to have a handgun so I can protect myself if somebody comes after me. So he's trying to build these bridges of trust, even though he's playing a manipulative game in the background, and he doesn't think I'm onto him, even though I am. All the same, during my last few days there, my last week there, that's when he gave me a handgun, 2 knives, and a case full of ammunition. I did not have to pay money for the knives or the gun, but I think I gave him like $100 for the ammunition he gave me. He gave me the ammunition, but I gave him money for that because it was like 1,000 rounds, And so after he gave me the gun and everything, and then when I did leave Las Vegas and I started driving towards Oregon, The only time that gun was ever fired, I ended up pulling off a road. I think some random road in Nevada. I pulled off the highway and went down some gravel road, and I ended up getting out of my van and I went and shot. I shot one full magazine of the handgun, because it was a magazine it was a handgun that had one of those magazines that goes into the under handle, and it was like 6 or 7 rounds. So I went and shot one magazine, and that's the only time I ever shot it. After that, that was right after I left. I shot it, and then for the entire duration that I had those weapons, I never used them for any other, not just to, I'd never used them to target practice. I never committed any sort of violence with the weapons that Dan gave me. I essentially just, the ammunition Dan gave me was in one of those green ammunition cans, where essentially I just kept all the knives and ammo all stored away and pretty much out of sight, out of mind. There was a period of time when I was carrying the handgun on my side as a means of self-defense. When I started getting death threats and stuff, I actually started wearing the handgun. But at some point, at some point, when things started getting really scary with the death threats and me finding out that somebody had gotten murdered, and then also knowing that Joe got murdered, things were getting really scary. So that's why I carried the gun. But at some point, when I did go to the police and the FBI, I went to the Redmond Police Department and the FBI in Bend and tried to get help from both agencies, and neither of them wanted to talk to me or help me, and they just sent me on my way with the guns that Dan had given me. I don't know why. I don't know what's happening in the background. I'm not accusing anybody of one thing or the other. I'm just saying that's what happened. And so, that's where those weapons kind of came into the equation back then. And then if you're somebody who watched like my last YouTube video that I shared like the day before I got arrested, and you watched that video and you saw me showing those weapons on camera, well, I was just letting everybody know where they came from, and now here I am again. The police, whoever, I don't have those weapons anymore. Those weapons, I have no idea where they ended up. After all this went down, I'm a felon now. I'm a convicted felon. So as you're listening to me speak, I'm a convicted felon. So you're listening to the words of a convicted felon. I don't walk around carrying that as if it's something that like holds me down and I'm all guilt and shame about it. It's like, no, I got fucking set up. So everything that happened during my incarceration, I got set up, man. So I don't walk around feeling like I'm a convicted felon, even though on paper I am. But all the same, because I am a convicted felon, I'm not allowed to ever shoot or hold a gun again. I'm never allowed to go pick up a gun and go target shooting. So the only thing I'm allowed is to carry a small knife. The most, as far as a weapon, I can carry a small knife and that's it. But, beyond that, so that's where all, the weapons and all that, that's where all of that comes into the equation. So whoever you are as a listener, now you know, okay? So now you know. And so with that said, how much time do I got? Oh, perfect. The timer is about out, so that's a perfect time because I was about to shift gears. Oh. All right. Now we've made it. Now I can finally start talking about what happened after Vegas. Again, there's lots of shit I can talk about during that 2-month span, but I've given you pretty much the main things that you really need to know. There's more I can give you, but you got what you need for now, okay? We can talk about stuff later down the, if we can make it through everything I'm trying to make it through, we can always revisit things and talk about more later, okay? So don't get all tripped out about, if you're wanting to know more about the DMT or the mushrooms, or you want to know more about Joe or more about Jamie, or you want to know about the things Dan and I talked about, well, we can revisit that at another time. But I'm just saying right now, I've given you what you need to know, because again, I'm trying to show you how these connections are formed and how certain people are connected together, and then how psychedelics came into the equation. Because remember, it's all connected, right? So now you have a general idea of some of the stuff I encountered during this 2-month span. And like I said, when I returned back to Central Oregon, my family was treating me different, as if they were aware of what might have happened there, as if somebody was updating them, or if this is something kind of like the Truman Show, where people was actually watching what happened. They saw what happened. I have no idea. But I'm just saying, now that you're aware of that, well, when I did return to Central Oregon, and my family was acting weird towards me, I think it was like my first or second day back to, I went all the way back to my mom and dad's house, where essentially I started living at their house again. I stayed at their house for in total I stayed at their house for like another month before I continued north, going up to Montana, where I spent my summer. But for that, after leaving Las Vegas, that next month in Oregon there was a lot of really bizarre stuff that happened. But I'm saying, it was like my first or second day back to Redmond. That night, because I told you that I returned, I came back with some mushrooms that I got from Dan and Joe. So I returned back with some mushrooms, okay? So now that I was home, well, I hadn't told my parents I can't remember what all I told them, but I did not tell them that I had returned with mushrooms. So it was like the first or second night back, because of how my parents were behaving, they were just acting really weird. And then once it became nighttime that night, I ate a little bit of mushrooms. I don't remember how much I ate, but I ate a little bit of mushrooms, and the mushrooms kicked in, and I wasn't tripping or anything. That I could just, for a while I was on a good trip. I ended up just going downstairs, and I was in my own space, minding my own business. At some point, this is like my first or second night back. So I consumed those mushrooms because I had a lot to think about. I just got away from Dan and all the shit that had just happened there, but now I'm away from them, and I've just driven this long distance and have returned home. I wanted to eat a few mushrooms, dial into these frequencies that I've told you about, where when I eat these things, I dial into these frequencies, and all of a sudden I kind of start getting updated about stuff that's been happening in the background. Well, when I did that, I was downstairs. I was in my own space, minding my own business. At some point, that night, Jerry, my dad, came downstairs, and him and I ended up getting into an argument. But the thing is, when he came downstairs, I had thought he had gone to bed. I thought he had gone to bed that night. When I did the mushrooms, I thought both my parents were asleep, and so I was essentially downstairs. I had no issue staying up late. Not a big deal. I just wanted to be in my own space where it's completely quiet. But for whatever reason, when Jerry came all the way downstairs, opened it's like the living room office area, opens the room, and he steps in where it's just him and I. And the first thing he said to me, literally the first thing he said to me as he came in, he said, "Something told me to come downstairs and talk to you." And because I was a little bit on mushrooms, well, that, I tuned into that really quick. And so I'm like, sure, let's have a conversation. I can't remember everything that we talked about that night, but the key point of me even mentioning this, Jerry started putting off some very bad energy while he was talking to me. And from what I remember seeing, it was like the face, the muscles on his face, his facial complexion changed, almost like his face changed before my eyes. It was like looking at it he was a different person. And it wasn't an hallucination, because I've experienced this when I've been in sober too. But his face changed, just his muscle complexion changed, and then his eyes turned black. I told you about Dan, and I've mentioned the black eyes. Well, his eyes turned black, and it was like I was talking, either talking to the real Jerry, the inner Jerry, or something was taking possession of him and was using him as a vassal to speak with me. I don't know. Either way, when his eyes changed and I saw that, I don't remember, as far as the words that we exchanged, I don't remember the conversation. But at some point, I remember telling my dad to stay the fuck away from me. I was like, dude, you need to stay the fuck away from me. Get away. Like, I told him to stay away. Like, because what I was seeing was, it was pretty evil. And I think that was probably the second time I've experienced that. I think I had experienced that once before with my dad. I don't think it was a later time, but I had experienced it before with him. So this wasn't the first time I had seen this, and that's where I essentially told him to stay the fuck away from me, because I was catching on that Jerry's tapped into some dark stuff. And both of these times that I have seen his eyes turn black, it's when he has consumed a lot of alcohol, where he's essentially drunk. I can't tell you how much alcohol, but he's an alcoholic. He drinks every night, so it takes quite a bit for him to drink in order to get to that state of mind where he's drunk. But he was on that level, and when I've seen him 2 different times, at least 2 or 3 times, where he gets to that level and his eyes change, and I've seen his facial complexion change as if something else is talking. But that happened, okay, and so eventually, when I told him to get the fuck away from me, he ended up leaving, right? And then I was back in my own space, and then I was left contemplating this, like thinking about it, like, wow, like this is crazy, like Dan and him, okay, and so the next thing that would happen, and if you remember, I keep saying I had a hit on my life when I went down to Las Vegas. Somebody had created a hit. I don't know exactly who. I can't point fingers on exactly who, but I've been very suspicious that Jerry might be the one directly involved, and then other family members might be taking his lead, and they all signed off on it. I don't know. It could just be Jerry. I'm not sure. Okay, but I'm saying, because they did not, because they decided not to assassinate me, but I'm saying they made that agreement to, there was a life that was owed. When I left for Vegas, they had every intention of my life ending, so, meaning they owe a life. However they made that deal or agreement, well, they're all of a sudden out in the universe, there's a life that's owed. And because they ended up not taking my life, when I ended up returning back to Central Oregon, it was within like a week or 2 of being back home. My father's mom, so Jerry's mom, so my grandma, she died. She, based off the story I was told, she woke up one morning, and as she was climbing out of bed, supposedly she got lightheaded. And, she got out of bed, got lightheaded, and then she, fainted or fell over, and she hit her head on, the corner of the nightstand, and then, that caused brain hemorrhaging or something, and because, nobody found her in time, she essentially died on the floor. That's the story that was relayed to me. What actually happened, I don't know. That could have actually been what happened, but I'm saying it wasn't a coincidence that my grandma and Jerry's mom would die within 2 weeks of my return from Las Vegas. And the energy that has hit me has told me that it had everything to do with the hit that had previously been made on my life. It was kind of like a rubber band snapping back and hitting you in your face, or it's just like this thing. Well, a life was owed. And whoever made the choice on as far as who paid the price, that wasn't anything I had to do with. I didn't even know. I had no knowledge of it. Whether it was Heavenly Father or the Angel of Death, or maybe Jerry was told that he had to pay. There was a life that was owed, and Jerry chose. I don't know. But either way, his mom died within 2 weeks. Okay, died within 2 weeks of my return. Okay, and so to add to this, during my grandma's funeral, I attended her funeral, so you had at her funeral in attendance, as far as the Durgan family, you had my dad, my aunt, and my uncle. So that would be my dad. I'll put Jerry I'll just draw you the kind of like the family tree. I might need a new marker. Hold on. This one's dried out. So you have Jerry, his brother. Well, I'm not going to name names. It's not that. I'm not. It's, and sister. Okay. So as far as the family tree, you know, these three, you know, his brother is older. Jerry is the middle child. He has a younger sister and an older brother. Okay, so then if you want to do the family tree, you could say their mom and dad. So I'll just, their mom and dad. Which would be, you know, that'd be my grandma and that'd be my grandpa. Okay? But, you know, when Grandpa was already dead, you know, I told you about Grandpa's funeral. You know, I've talked about that. Well, when I returned back from Las Vegas, well, now, you know, they're, you know, this family tree, right? Or, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. You know, this family tree, they're all connected, right? My grandma and grandpa conceived my dad, his brother and sister, okay? So now their mom died, and it's just the three of them, okay? And then so you know, as far as his children, you know, you got my mom, you know, my mom, and you also got my sister. Okay, so as far as we're thinking about who is in attendance at my grandma's funeral, okay, so we're thinking about who might have been in attendance at my grandma's funeral. Well, you know, first there's my family, right? And then you got his wife, my uncle. You say uncle. And remember, my uncle, he is a retired state trooper, a retired Oregon State police officer, right? So you got his wife. So my aunt. So you got my aunt, right? And then you also have, he has two daughters. So I'll just say daughters. Daughters times two. So there's two of them. He has two daughters. They're my cousins, older cousins. Okay. And the same thing with got my uncle, you got my dad, and then they both have a sister, right? So my aunt. So this is my other aunt. Okay. So, and she has two daughters. She's not married at the time, but she has been. But she's not right now, but she has two daughters. Okay. And the thing is, between, you know, these are my cousins. I'll just say cousins. You know, I gotta write that too. Cousins. So, between my sister and my two cousins from my dad's brother's side, and my two cousins from my dad's sister's side, all of my cousins, they're all female, and they're all older than me. So as me growing up as a child, I was the youngest and I was the only male, okay? Well, as time went forward, well, my cousins, you know, when they reached like 18, 19 years old, they started popping out their own kids. So they have their own kids, right? So you can start adding, you know, this, as far as the family tree, it just starts adding, where I got like second cousins, right? And so they're like, some of them they're still children, and some of them are now teenagers, because, you know, I'm 37 now, and I'm the youngest out of all of my cousins, so a lot of their children are almost about to start having their own children. But at the same time, where I'm going with this is, I'm talking about my grandma, you know, I'll put grandma, at my grandma's funeral. And this is like sometime around May of 2018. So we're at my grandma's funeral, and we have, you know, not only is my uncle at the funeral, and my uncle's wife, and my cousins and their children, but also you have my aunt and her daughters and their children are at my grandma's funeral. And then you got my dad and my mom and my sister, she has children, right? And she's married. And I'm telling you, at that funeral, hold on, sounds like a helicopter. or airplane. Sounds like an airplane flying right over the van. But I'm saying at my grandma's funeral, every single one of them, they were all like glaring at me. With exception to my niece and nephew on my sister's side, my niece and nephew, so my sister's children, everybody else was like glaring at me, giving me the stink eye, an evil eye. They were just putting off this really bad energy as if it was my fault that my grandma was dead. And I have no idea why. I have no idea what the fuck is even happening. I'm attending my grandma's funeral because she's my grandma, and I spent a lot of time with my grandma helping her out or doing stuff. I helped my grandma mow her yard, rake pine needles, pick up pine cones. I was always around helping her out as she was in her older age. And so as far as I was aware, I had a pretty good relationship with my grandma. My grandpa died when I was young, so, I didn't, doesn't really matter about my relationship with my grandpa, but I had a pretty good relationship with my grandma. But now that she was dead and I'm attending her funeral, every single person within the remaining Durgan family, and they're all like glaring at me like it's my fault, and I don't even know why. Like, why are you guys putting off this bad energy to me? So now, after her funeral, well, they had my grandma's wake. Well, I didn't attend the wake because during the funeral, they all put off bad energy, and I wasn't going to go to my grandma's wake and spend time around these people. So I ended up just going home, and then my mom and dad went, everybody went and spent time together without me being around. Okay, so that was pretty much the last time I've ever seen anybody from my family, as far as my extended family. Since my grandma's death and her funeral, I have not really crossed paths with anybody, and I have no idea where they have gone in their lives or things that have happened to them. I have no idea. Okay? The only interaction I've been allowed to have since then is with him, with my mom and my sister and her family, but the rest of my family has been missing. I don't know what they got going on. Okay? But after all of that happened and I picked up on all of this, well, you can imagine being me, I didn't want to stay home any longer. I wanted to get out of Redmond as soon as possible because apparently my entire family is treating me really, really odd, and I don't want to be around them anymore. So that's when, it was like about a month after getting back from Las Vegas, about a month later, right, I ended up driving north all the way up to Kalispell, Whitefish, Montana area. And so when that happened, remember, Joe had not died yet, so remember, when this happened, Joe was not yet dead. Joe and Dan, they were still on good terms, and they were working together, and Dan was Joe's apprentice for growing mushrooms, and so they were starting, that was a thing they had going on in Vegas. But I had got away from them, I'd separated from them, but I was still in contact with them. And if you remember, I told you before, how do I know that Dan and Jerry were not in contact before I had even met Dan? So how do I know when I returned back to Redmond, Dan had not already been talking to Jerry, and everybody in the Durgan family was aware of what went down through Jerry and Dan? It was communicated. And then my mom paid... Alright. So I just wiped down the board again. Kind of, I'm trying to keep things organized. As far as the timeline, with my grandma's death and her funeral, that was when I ended up going to Montana. I left. I think it was sometime around the end of the month of May, or sometime in the month of May, and. This is, I scribbled this part, so this is essentially what I've covered. When I'm filling this in, that's just a visual to let you know that I've covered this part, and I'm trying to keep us moving forward. My destination is to get us right here, and once we get to my incarceration, then eventually then I can shift gears to what's after that. But right now, I'm trying to keep us moving, and after my grandma's funeral, there's still one more pretty kind of messed up thing that happened, but it didn't happen until about, it was like a week or two after I drove up to Montana. So about a week or two after I separated from my mom and dad and all of the Durgan family in Oregon, I ended up, I can't remember if my mom called me or texted me, but she ended up letting me know. So my mom had a little dachshund, like a wiener dog, right? And a little wiener dog named Marley. And well, at the time, you know, both my mom and dad were still working. They were both still employed. And because there was nobody else left, nobody at the house to watch after their little dog, well, they would leave their dog in the garage. They would just leave their dog in the garage, and then when they would get home, you know, they would let the dog out of the garage. And so the dog had the garage to roam around. If he had to pee or poop, he would just pee or poop on the garage floor. But I think the whole point of my mom and dad leaving him in the garage was because he continued peeing and pooping on the carpet in the house, and they didn't really know what else to do with him. Either way, after I went to Montana, it was like a week or two later, my mom let me know that they had to put their little dog Marley down. They had to euthanize their dog because my mom told me that my mom's version of events was that Jerry got home and found Marley with his back broken, and Jerry told my mom that Marley, you know, that there might be a rat inside the garage, and that Marley might have been chasing, you know, the rat. You know, Marley might have been chasing the rat in the garage. And while Marley was chasing the rat, he might have not, you know, he might have pushed over like this, it was like a heavy board or this piece of metal that was leaning up against the garage wall, and it fell. You know, Jerry's version of events is that Marley might have been chasing a rat, and this thing, he might have knocked over this heavy thing, and it fell and landed on Marley, therefore breaking his back. You know, he broke his back, so he couldn't use his rear legs anymore. He was just dragging his rear legs, like dragging his feet. That's what, you know, that's... So my mom relayed all this to me, telling me that supposedly there was a rat inside the garage, and this event happened where her dog's back was broken, and then they ended up having to go euthanize their dog because they did not want to spend the money getting surgery, the dog having to get surgery, and you don't even know if that'll fix it. So my mom was like devastated, absolutely devastated. So this happened like 2 weeks or whatever, like 2 weeks or 3 weeks after my dad's mom had just died. So that's the version of events that I was told. And so, but also I have, you know, once I'm told this, well, remember, I still have mushrooms. I still have, because I still had access to mushrooms, and I've told you, when I'm in my own company by myself and I eat some mushrooms, doesn't even have to be a high dose, especially back then. I didn't need much to get a decent experience out of mushrooms. So when I would be in my own space and I'd eat the mushrooms, I'd tap into these higher frequencies, and these higher frequencies would communicate with me, let me know about what might have actually happened. And so I had this alternate scenario shared with me about what might have actually happened. I can't remember when it was I did the mushrooms and I tapped into this alternate scenario, but I had this information shared with me at some point telling me that my mom's dog, Marley was a dog, Marley the dog. Marley was just a little dog, right? Little wiener dog. It's a little dog. That Marley's death was not just a random coincidence. I had it shared with me that if you think about, well, you know, if they had tried murdering me, you know, say my dad and maybe other members of my family, they all signed off on having me assassinated for whatever reasons, but because that didn't happen and because my dad's mother paid the price, right? Imagine being my father and that just happened to you. Well, I've told you that my dad is an alcoholic and he drinks alcohol a lot, especially every single night he drinks alcohol. So who's to say, because Jerry's mother just died, and Jerry might be fully aware why she died as a product of them canceling the hit, and now I'm still alive. Well, do you think Jerry might have, Jerry got home from work one night or one evening while my mom was still at her job, so he got home from work before her. And do you think that Jerry is walking around carrying this guilt and shame and anger, and it's all just festering and boiling over, right? Who's to say that when Jerry got home after drinking a little bit of alcohol or whatever, when he went and got, when he got home to go get Marley out of the garage, well, maybe Marley had pooped all over the floor or whatever. I'm just saying something triggered Jerry's anger. And from what was shared with me, Jerry might have full-on kicked Marley out of anger, and it literally broke his back. It literally broke Marley's back because Jerry kicked him with his foot. And then after that, Jerry realized the mistake he made. He realized that he really just hurt Marley, and there's nothing he can do to take that back because now Marley's back is broken. Well, when my mom got home and found out about it, well, what do you think Jerry did? He went and told my mom that there was a rat in the garage and that this pole, he probably went and staged the whole thing as if there's a pole laying on the ground. And he's like, yeah, I think this pole fell and landed on Marley, and that's why Marley's the way he is. All of that to get my mom to not blame Jerry, because my mom would maybe she wouldn't suspect that and she would believe him, therefore Jerry would not be held accountable so Jerry could walk free. I don't know, maybe, this whole thing happened behind my mom's back and he literally lied to her about what he did to her dog. Well, that devastated my mom, and, they ended up having to put Marley down. So Marley was no longer alive, and so now my grandma, my dad's mom was dead. Now Marley was dead, and then in just a couple months' time, Joe would be dead. So if you think about, is it all just a coincidence, or is there some really fucked up stuff happening? And because I was kind of tuning into this stuff, where I'm kind of scratching my head, like, dude, I'm like, something isn't right, man. This is all like, there's some really bad stuff going on. Okay, so that all happened around here, and then so from pretty much May through August, August 2018, that's when I was in Montana. Okay, so I was in Montana, and I was doing yard work and landscaping for different contacts that I had made through Craigslist. And at some point I ended up working for some doctor or a medical warden. I worked for some medical warden. Hold on, there's a lot of noise. Ended up working for some medical warden in Kalispell who pretty much kept me employed for the entire summer, where I was showing up to his place. He had a family, and I was just doing yard work for them for like 4 to 5 hours a day, just doing maintenance on their property. So I kept myself employed during this period of time. But at the same time, while I was working and making honest money, don't forget about, you got Joe and Dan. So they are running their mushroom business. You got mushroom, DMT, maybe LSD, I don't know. I mean, you got cannabis. They're running some business out of Las Vegas, and they're using social media to advertise and market and make money, right? And I'm just somebody who has met them, and I've done DMT with Dan, and I met Joe, and now I have connections with them where if I want mushrooms, all I gotta do is hit up Dan or hit up Joe, either with a text message or whatever, and then all I gotta do is get on PayPal and make my payment, and then within 12 to 24 hours, they would have my order, in the mailbox or somewhere, and it would be shipped to me within a week. So that was something they were doing. Okay, and Dan was fully involved with Joe's business. They were working together hand in hand. And then if you remember, Joe, those two got in some type of argument because, again, there's things happening in the background that I have no knowledge of. So they got in a big argument sometime in July, right? But right now we're talking about May and August. May through August while I'm in Montana. So this is where, if you're somebody, if you've watched all my previous videos, I literally spent probably like an hour or so talking about what happened. I told one of the main stories that happened when I was in Montana that second summer, where I encountered that my friend Robert and his girlfriend Lexi, and we drove all the way we drove as far as Minnesota in my van. And I told you about meeting Robert's parents, and then I told you about what Robert's dad told me about his girlfriend being some type of like gold digger, somebody that was just using his son, financially. And then I ended up confronting Lexi, Robert's girlfriend. She ended up like flipping, like turning into a full on went on demon mode on me. Like she just started screaming at me after I confronted her. And then she ended up stealing like $400 or $500, somewhere around $400 out of my wallet. And, this happened that summer. She stole my hard-earned money from landscaping, all of that. She stole a whole bunch of cash out of my wallet, and her and Robert went north across the United States-Canada border. They went into Canada, and then at some point, Lexi and Robert shared. I can't remember if it was Lexi or Robert or both of them. But after they got away from me with the money that Lexi had stolen, they turned around and shared a picture on their social media of the two of them standing on some mountain summit or some scenic point called the Devil's Thumb. They called the Devil's Thumb, and so after they posted that on social media, Dan's wife had left a message on Lexi's page talking about how pretty the view was. So all of a sudden, this, Robert and Lexi, when they came into my life during this time span, that's when I found out that Robert and Lexi were connected to Dan and his wife Jamie all the way down in Las Vegas. So that's when these other things, there's some messed up stuff that happened here. And again, I've already talked about that story on my channel, which means if you are somebody who has watched everything on my channel, you've heard that story. So I don't need to repeat it, nor do I want to, because it's too time consuming. But that was something that happened there. And then, whatever their agenda was, whatever they were trying to accomplish by trying to bait me on some boat or ship to get me, they were trying to get me on the East Coast and go up to the North Pole, right? But I knew that was some stupid thing from the beginning, and I just went along with it just to see where it was going, and so I could try fishing out where the source of this was all coming from. And we made it as far as Minnesota before we turned around. And Minnesota was where Robert's mom and dad lived, so that's where we stopped, and then we turned around. But I learned a lot during that period, and a lot of stuff was exposed and revealed to me where I was catching on to things that I had not been previously aware of. But after all of this stuff happened, now I was aware of it, which means I was getting warmer to where it's all coming from, right? So that's the whole point where I've said before, sometimes you have to let things happen naturally, and sometimes you have to play stupid and just to allow certain people to play their hand and reveal themselves. That way you can fully grasp and see what's being hidden on the other side of the door. If you pay enough attention, you can catch these fuckers. They're not that good at what they do. They're good at it when they're grouped together and there's a bunch of them. But when they're on their own, or there's only a few of them, and they have to be on their game, maintaining their poker face and keeping up the charade without stumbling a single time while fully knowing they're being watched, it's not an easy task. Like, for these people who have been... for these people that have been doing this type of stuff, yeah, they might be able to fool some people, but when you find out that you're being watched, it's not easy to maintain that charade 100% of the time. So anybody that's a faker, or you're a deceiver, you're a liar, you can only maintain that for so long. And especially, sometimes all you gotta do is allow enough time, sometimes years, sometimes, months or years, sometimes if you just be patient and allow that much time to pass, those who have spun those lies, those webs and lies and deceit and deception, well, after enough time, they will have spun so many lies and so much deception that it will become very difficult for them to consciously remember the original lie without deviating and forgetting what they had originally said. And then everything starts getting twisted, and all of a sudden you're hearing different narratives and different stories coming from the same person. And that's when you can, like I said, you're paying attention, you can watch people slip. And then once they slip, then you can start, that's essentially like watching their mask crack. And then all of a sudden you're getting a glimpse on something that they might be hiding. And so long as you keep applying pressure and don't let them escape, don't let them just deflect it and walk away and shrug it off and dismiss you, you just keep adding that pressure. Eventually the whole thing comes crashing fucking down. It just comes crashing down. And so, why do you think I got arrested in 2019? Well, maybe because I was catching on to a lot of stuff. But just because I was catching on to it doesn't mean everybody else around me had any idea what was going on. So if you remember all the weird and strange videos that I shared that summer 2019 before I was arrested, and I was just like a bouncy ball bouncing off the walls just talking about a whole bunch of random stuff. Well, I knew what was going on, but my mind, I was not disciplined enough. I was fighting for my life. I was fighting for my life. I didn't know I had help and support at that time compared to now. Today, I know I have help and support, which allows my stress levels to go down, which allows me to slow down and slowly articulate and elaborate on all of this in chronological order as best as I'm able to, and giving you guys the opportunity to see these things that I discovered a long time ago. But remember, back then I was fighting for my life. When I got arrested in 2019, I only weighed 120 pounds. I was borderline starving, and I was being stalked. I had people taking pictures of my vehicle parked outside my parents' house. I had a whole bunch of messed up stuff happening, and I didn't know who to trust. So essentially, I was just like, I was dangerous back then, just because I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know who to trust, who I could trust. And at the same time, I was aware of the bad guys out there who were trying to set me up and who were trying to make me disappear. Imagine being me with all of this stuff going on, and not only trying to function, but trying to communicate and articulate this to other people to try and get help. Just think about my YouTube channel. It's over 60 hours of information. Do you really feel like back then I could have ever got a police officer or a lawyer or somebody to sit down with me for 60 hours to hear this entire story? Well, back then, oh my God, the traffic noise. Back then, it was like it would have been impossible for that to happen. Being able to get anybody to sit down for 60 hours. Back then, that was not something that people were willing to do because they were also being lied to. And back then, people were not aware of the things that they're aware of. Back then, people were not aware of the things that they're aware of now, which means they were not susceptible or willing to give me the time that they might be willing to give me now. If you're somebody who has watched all of my current videos, you're caught up and you've put in the 60 hours, well, you're somebody who you've become aware of all kinds of stuff, and the things I'm sharing with you now makes a lot more sense than when I was trying to communicate with you guys back in 2019. This is where I'm saying, don't judge me based off back then. Look at what I'm offering and presenting to you now. That way you can try and form the most accurate answers. So that's the whole thing. My battery is almost dead on this, and so I'm probably going to take a break. I'm kind of tired of speaking right now. I've covered, we've covered just the important stuff on this part. And so the next thing we're really going to be getting into is like essentially when Kelly, so January 2019. I'm gonna write Kelly's name, so Kelly. Also Eureka, Eureka, California. Eureka. So I'm going to be cutting the video here in a moment, but I'm just letting you know I've pretty much told you everything you need to hear about this part for now. And where we're going to be heading next is essentially how I ended up in Eureka, and I'm just going to be covering some of the key points, important things for you to know as far as my time in Eureka. And I'll tell you about why I ended up getting out of there, and then eventually I'll be talking about my arrest and incarceration. So there's a lot more for me to continue talking about, and I just have to also remind myself I have to pace myself. I can't be trying to rush through this, because that's going to be causing all types of stress. I don't want to stress myself out with the time. Like, we're just going to get there when we get there, and that's for you to remember. You just got to be patient and allow me to just tell you this story and just understand, yes, it is going to take quite a while longer. It's going to take me quite a few more hours before we're even talking about what's currently going on and has happened in 2024 and what's currently going on now in 2025. There's a lot of stuff I still need to share with you in that regards. And right now, I'm just trying, not only remind myself, but to remind you, just put aside any type of idea where you're trying to get me to go faster and tell you about this other stuff, because everything I'm sharing with you is really to give you important facts and information to help you put together and solve the giant mystery. This is a decade-long mystery. This is a very giant puzzle for you to assemble if you can. It's a test to you. It's a test for you to see if you can even assemble the puzzle. And at the same time, remember, everything I'm sharing with you, all of the information I shared with you on my channel, it's all in my brain. So as I'm telling you all of this stuff, the story's already in my brain, and it's just me telling it to you. So if at some point in time something happens, well, the story's always in my brain, where even if you're not hearing about it, I still got it. I got locked up in my brain. It's just a matter of me getting the time to fully share it, and it's going to be a long one. We still got a long ways to go. Okay?